sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, buckle up, everybody. We're going deep on a deep freeze. I mean, you're probably already feeling that chill, right? But we are going to break it all down for you.
Yeah.
This polar vortex everyone's talking about. What is it? Where's it going? And what can you expect, like, in the next few days?
Mm-hmm.
And we're basing this deep dive on a CBS News article all about this polar vortex hitting the U.S. And let me tell you, this is not your typical, cold snap.
No, this is not just a little, dip in the temperature. What's really kind of interesting about this one is this particular polar vortex is originating all the way from Siberia.
Oh, wow.
Bringing with it some intensely cold air that's going to sweep across pretty much the whole U.S.
Siberia. No, that's some serious cold. So before we get into the specifics about this one, Can we just take a step back and what is a polar vortex? Can you explain that?
Absolutely, yeah. So think of it as a giant swirling mass of extremely cold air that's usually, hanging out up at the North and South poles. And typically it's kept contained by the jet stream, which acts as a sort of barrier holding it in those polar regions. But sometimes that jet stream weakens or shifts, and that's when the polar vortex can dip down, bringing those frigid temperatures much further south than usual.
So this dipping down, the CBS article has these maps showing how it's going to move across the U.S. over the weekend, and looking at these temperature drops and wind chills.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like certain regions are going to get slammed, especially the northern and central plains.
Right.
We're talking Minneapolis, Chicago, even St. Louis.
Yes, and what's particularly concerning is the timing. This is all happening right as the NFL playoff games are taking place in some of those areas.
Oh, that's right. The article mentions that temperatures could be 25 to 30 degrees below average for this time of year.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine being a player or a fan out there in those conditions?
Yeah, it's going to be dangerously cold, and those kinds of temperatures can pose some serious risks.
And it sounds like it's not just a weekend thing. Monday's forecast is even more intense, with this polar vortex potentially reaching all the way to the deep south.
Yeah, exactly. By Monday, the polar vortex is expected to reach its peak, impacting a huge swath of the country. And what's really unusual is even Atlanta could see freezing temperatures. We're talking widespread impacts across the Rockies, Plains, and Midwest as well. Some areas might not even get above the single digits.
Atlanta freezing. I mean, that is almost unheard of.
Right.
This is clearly way more than just a regular cold snap. It makes you wonder about, the bigger picture.
Right.
How does this kind of event fit into what we know about climate change?
Yeah, that's a great point. We're seeing these unusual and extreme weather events happen more and more frequently, and this polar vortex is a really stark example of that.
Speaking of big events happening during this deep freeze, I can't help but think about Inauguration Day in Washington, D.C. on Monday. The CBS article kind of paints a pretty chilly picture.
Yeah, the forecast for D.C. on Monday is for temperatures in the low 20s, but with wind chill, it will feel more like single digits. That would make it the coldest Inauguration Day in 40 years.
It's going to be interesting to see how they manage that. The article mentions that they're moving the ceremony indoors to avoid people, getting hurt. Back in 1985 when Reagan had his second inauguration, it was so cold they had to cancel the parade.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a pretty rare occurrence to have an inauguration be moved indoors. So it really does highlight the severity of this weather event.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely a sign of how intense this cold is going to be. So let's try and put this all together.
Yeah.
We've got this, massive wave of cold air coming all the way from Siberia, plunging temperature, across the whole U.S.
Right. And it's important to remember that this isn't just about, feeling a bit chilly. We're talking about potentially dangerous conditions, especially for folks that are exposed to the elements for long periods of time.
Absolutely. The article mentions, the risk of hypothermia and frostbite.
Sure.
And I imagine there could be broader impacts too, transportation disruptions, increased energy demand, maybe even impacts on infrastructure if pipes freeze.
Yeah, you're hitting on some key points there. Extreme cold can have cascading effects on all sorts of systems. Transportation networks can be disrupted by, icy roads and frozen tracks. Energy grids can be strained as people crank up the heat. And yes, infrastructure can be damaged by freezing pipes. There's also the potential for impacts on agriculture and livestock.
That's a good point. I hadn't even considered like the impact on crops and livestock. It really highlights like how widespread the effects can be of an event like this. So what can people do to prepare for this kind of extreme cold?
Well, first and foremost, it's about staying informed. Keep an eye on the weather forecasts and any warnings that are issued by, local authorities.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's a lot of, practical steps people can take to prepare their homes and themselves.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, making sure your home is properly insulated is really crucial. Check for drafts around windows and doors, and consider adding insulation to attics and crawl spaces if necessary. Have a plan for dealing with power outages. Make sure you've got flashlights, extra batteries, maybe even a backup generator if possible.
Those are great tips. It's easy to like take those things for granted until you suddenly need them.
Exactly. And don't forget about stocking up on some essential supplies.
Yeah.
Things like food and water. It's always a good idea to have a few days worth on hand, just in case you can't get to the store.
And of course, dressing warmly is essential. I know that sounds obvious, but it's important to like layer up and make sure you've got a good hat, gloves, and scarf to protect any exposed skin.
Absolutely, yeah. Layering is key because it allows you to regulate your body temperature more effectively. And don't underestimate the importance of covering exposed skin, especially your face, ears, and hands.
And this all seems like particularly important or relevant, I guess, given, those NFL games that are happening in some of these like coldest areas.
It certainly does. Those outdoor stadiums can get incredibly cold and fans and players alike need to, take precautions to stay safe.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even like, sporting events and presidential inaugurations, they aren't immune to Mother Nature.
That's so true. And it kind of brings us back to that broader question we touched on earlier. As we see these kind of extreme weather events become more frequent, what does that mean for, our future? And what can we do not just to prepare for them, but to potentially mitigate their impact?
That's a big question, and it's not one with, easy answers.
Right.
But it seems like understanding the science behind these events is a good place to start.
I completely agree. Yeah, the more we understand about how these events work, the better equipped we'll be to anticipate them and adapt to the changes they bring.
So if we loop back to, this polar vortex we're facing right now, are there any like insights from this specific event that could help inform our thinking about climate change and its potential impact?
There are definitely some key takeaways here. One thing this event highlights is the interconnectedness of our climate system. The fact that a shift in the jet stream, which is influenced by a whole range of factors, can bring, such extreme cold from Siberia all the way down to the southern U.S., it really underscores how complex and far-reaching the effects of climate change can be.
It's like a domino effect where, one change triggers a cascade of other changes.
Exactly, yeah. And this event also underscores the importance of resilience and adaptation. As we see these extreme weather events becoming more common, we need to think about how we can make our communities and infrastructure more resilient to these kinds of shocks.
So beyond those practical steps we talked about earlier, like, insulating homes and having emergency supplies, what are some like bigger picture things we can do to build that resilience?
Well, on a community level, it's about having strong, emergency response plans, ensuring that vulnerable populations have access to support, and investing in infrastructure that can withstand, extreme conditions. And on a broader scale, it's about addressing climate change itself, through initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to more sustainable energy sources.
It sounds like addressing climate change is really key. Not just for like mitigating the impacts of these extreme weather events, but for potentially reducing their frequency as well.
That's the hope, yeah. While we can't prevent all extreme weather events, taking action to mitigate climate change could help to reduce their severity and frequency in the long run.
So I guess the message here is that this polar vortex is a pretty powerful reminder, of the interconnectedness of our climate system, the potential impacts of these extreme weather events, and the importance of, being prepared and taking action to address the root causes of climate change.
I think that's a great summary. And as we all brace for this deep freeze, it's an opportunity to reflect on what we can do, both individually and collectively, to build a more resilient and sustainable future.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get